Welcome to the presentation on activating background knowledge, the importance of activating background knowledge in the content areas. During this presentation, you're going to hear a lot of similar things that were said during the vocabulary presentation. Both background knowledge and vocabulary are very important aspects to build when you're thinking about the content areas. You want all of your students to come into a new unit having the same background knowledge, having the same experience, or at least a foundation of knowledge in order to build upon and learn more about whatever the topic is that you're introducing in your content area. Background knowledge and vocabulary are the foundations of learning in the content areas, and they must be accessed. They go hand in hand. The number one fact that you need to remember is what students already know about a content is a strong indicator of success with that new information. We know that students who have an interest in the Civil War are going to do very well on that when it comes to studying that subject in school. They already have the background knowledge. They don't have to try to relearn all of this new information. That information is already in their memory. We're going to talk a little bit about the brain during this presentation, memory and intelligence. So there are two kinds of intelligences. You have your fluid or your innate intelligence, which is that which automatically processes information into your permanent memory. And then you have your crystallized or learned intelligence, and that's one that you can build upon and has the ability for students to learn and grow. There is a strong relationship with academic knowledge and crystallized intelligence. Crystallized intelligence is that one which can grow, whereas your fluid or innate is one that that automatically happens. So there's little to no relationship with innate intelligence and increasing your background knowledge, but your crystallized or learned intelligence has a strong relationship with that academic knowledge. And it's proof that if you provide experiences for your students, you can increase a student's background knowledge. Think about those students in your classes that are in poverty. They're at a disadvantage. They haven't had the exposure to a plethora of experiences, especially those academic experiences. Those academic experiences are limited. They've grown up, their families have had little resources to be able to provide the experiences that they might be able to use later on in life in their academic area. There are 6 principles to indirectly enhancing and building background knowledge and experiences. Your first is understanding that background knowledge is stored in packets of information. So you have these memory records, and a student may not have directly experienced what you're talking about, but if given a generic description of information, those experiences can then lead to understanding. Students who have lots of background knowledge can make connections quite easily without even knowing it because that information is already in their memory records. So let's think about an inner city student who has never gone camping. And there's a student in their class that's talking about a trip that they've taken. That inner city student is going to create a memory record of that camping trip from what they heard from their classmate. That inner city kid is going to have a general idea of what camping's like, which leads to then mental images of the trip and other sensory images. They may be able to hear the crickets in the woods and smell the pine needles of the trees in the forest. They'll be able to process and remember and then therefore create some background knowledge. And that's part of that dual coding theory that we talked about in the vocabulary presentation, that linguistic, language-based, and non-linguistic representations. That's how your students are going to store those memories, sharing the experiences through the language, through the descriptions of the trip, and also providing pictures are going to enhance the storage of that background knowledge, which is similar to what we see with vocabulary. Our second principle, storing background knowledge in permanent memory, can be enhanced. Most people think that memory is divided into your long and short-term memories, but it's actually not two separate. It's only one memory that has 3 different functions. Those 3 different functions are your sensory memory, your permanent memory, and your working memory. Your sensory memory is very short-term. It's a temporary storage of what you receive from your 5 senses. And if you think about it, it's going to be difficult to process all that information from all those senses at one time. I know for myself, there are certain smells I have in summertime that bring me back to memories that I had as a kid. And that's just part of what that sensory memory did for me. It took that smell and then helped me to store that memory in my permanent memory. And your sensory memory are those that are encountered for just brief periods of time. And if you don't build upon it, most of it is going to be lost. Your permanent memory is your bank. That's your repository of background knowledge. Once that information finds its way to your permanent memory, it can be retrieved without even knowing that you're retrieving it. It's just like that smell. Once I have that smell, and actually it's of my husband's cologne, it brings me back to the first memories of us being together, as well as other smells of going to the pool and things like that when I was a kid. The information stored here can be accessed when needed, and it's used for both academic and non-academic information. Your working memory is kind of like a revolving door. In the working memories, it can be received from the sensory memory and permanent memory, or both. It's sometimes called the seat of consciousness because it is where the memory is kept or lost. The quality and type of processing in the working memory is what makes the decision of whether or not that memory is going to be in permanent memory or if it's going to leave to go back to the sensory memory. The graphic at the top of the page here kind of shows you the pathway of how memory works in your brain. It goes from the sensory memory to your working memory, and then decides if it's going to go to permanent memory, or if you're going to take it from permanent memory and then bring it out to use it in working memory for whatever situation you're in. So quality working memory is what we want to hit in the content areas. And there are 3 aspects of quality working memory. You have your memory trace, depth of process, and elaboration. Your memory trace is your pathway to information. The more times that we engage information in the working memory, the higher the probability of it being stored in permanent memory. So therefore, the more times a student processes information, the greater chance it's going to be embedded in their permanent memory. Depth of processing is where you add details to your understanding. So where students can identify with the characteristics on a deeper level. Just like some of the information about the camping trip. That student could identify with some of the characteristics of their friend telling them about their camping trip and then can therefore understand it better. Elaboration is making new or varied connections and synthesizing the information. So that would be the instance where that inner city student heard the camping trip, thought about it, and then related it to sleeping over at someone else's house or at their grandma's house. The same feel of sleeping over somewhere else, but doing it in a tent out in nature. What we need to remember is that when we are giving out new information, within 2 days of receiving new information, students need 3 to 4 exposures to make it stick, to make it stay in that permanent memory. So you should typically spend a couple days making sure that students have the background knowledge that you want them to know so that they can better understand and learn throughout the unit that you're ready to teach. Our third principle is background knowledge is multidimensional. Its value is contextual. So individuals may have lots of background knowledge in one area but little in another. Just like our student that knows a lot about the Civil War may not know a lot about the elements in science. So enhancement must be done subject by subject, especially with the Common Core state standards targeting disciplinary literacy in the specific academic areas. All kinds of background knowledge are important. Plays a critical role in the ability to communicate within a culture and learn information. So therefore, it's very important, especially if you have those ELL students, to go to the very basics of what you know your students need, the background knowledge your students need in order to understand the information you're going to be presenting to them. You need to be consistent with your learning objectives and the essential questions in the content areas, which is what the Common Core state standards are trying to do, is find that consistency across the nation. Our fourth principle is surface level background knowledge can be useful. It doesn't have to be extremely detailed. and any exposure or general idea on the topic will aid in the comprehension and learning of your students. Knowledge is organized in a hierarchy. There's different levels, and the top level knowledge that students have is easier to retrieve. So if we're thinking about a canary, lots of times probably the first thing that you thought of too was that, oh, it's a yellow bird. That's your top level knowledge. Most everybody, when you say canary, they know it's a yellow bird of some kind. Low level knowledge, which is more in-depth knowledge, can greatly aid students' comprehension and learning, even if it's somewhat accurate. It can help students understand information in terms. So when you learn more about that canary, the canary can breathe, and then you go even more deeply. Oh, they use canaries in mines to check out whether or not there was enough oxygen in that mine so that the miners could go in and do their job. Depending on the level, even if they have just the smallest amount of understanding, any kind of building upon that surface level information will help students to better understand your topic. And when we meet during our face-to-face days, we will explore a lot of different ways that you can activate students' prior knowledge and build upon it. Once again, background knowledge and vocabulary are the foundations of learning in the content areas. They must be accessed. They go hand in hand. A lot of the things we're going to talk about with vocabulary are going to be similar to what you would do to activate background knowledge in your students. Teaching vocabulary is synonymous with teaching background knowledge. Both are taught using similar approaches. And there's a strong relationship with background knowledge and vocabulary. We know that vocabulary and intelligence are highly correlated. The more a student reads, the more words they encounter, the more that they know about the world. And words are reference points to permanent memory. Sometimes you know there are certain words that someone might say and it's going to conjure up an image. And those are the packets of knowledge that students have. So the more words you know, the more knowledge you can have, the more background knowledge. So vocabulary and background knowledge are both very important. This is from Vygotsky. He's an educational researcher from 1962. A word does not refer to a single object, but to a group or to a class of objects. Each word is therefore already a generalization. Something to think about. Our last principle, virtual experiences enhance background knowledge. So think about the three types of memory, your sensory, working, permanent memory. The sensory memory lasts a few moments before working memory, and then it must be translated as representations. You're not going to get the complete direct experience when it's put into working memory. We're frequently one step removed from sensory experiences because this is not a true exact experience, but what our mind takes away from that experience. We can offer alternatives, though, to building that background knowledge, and one of them is through reading, which is the most straightforward way to create virtual experiences. It's not as robust as the real thing, but engaging students in reading can take them on that magic carpet ride to new places and experiences through the reading that would otherwise be out of their reach. Think about your average fifth grader. They read 650,000 words in a year. Your average avid reader reads 5.85 million words in a year. Those reading in the 90th percentile in volume encountered hundreds more words than those who read a volume found in the 10th percentile. That's why that SSR component in the middle and high school is so important. Another virtual experience is language interaction. The more we talk about experiences, the more others will gain from our talk and their background knowledge will expand. Talking and listening to peers. The words and ideas that you're hearing are translated then into working memory, just like the inner city kid and the camping trip. Educational TV is also a great way to help build background knowledge, those virtual experiences through that avenue. Entertainment programs, we know, do not aid in background knowledge, but educational programs do. Watching a movie about a topic has the same effect on students as listening to a lecture or reading about the topic. So watching a movie about it, listening to a speech is something that students would be able to use and build off of and store in their background knowledge. Like I said, we're going to explore a lot more ways that we can activate background knowledge and utilize vocabulary in our content areas in our face-to-face days. This is the end of the presentation.